Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, CEO and founder of Ellig Group, executive search advisors and pioneers in redefining executive search through our unwavering commitment to helping organizations hire exceptional leaders and build inclusive environments. Today on Leadership Reimagined, our conversation is on transformation to transition, leadership, legacy, and the future. And I am delighted to welcome Jim Fitterling, Chair and CEO of Dow, one of the most innovative, customer-centric, inclusive, and sustainable materials science companies in the world, serving customers across high-growth markets, including packaging, infrastructure, mobility, and consumer applications. As Chair and CEO since 2019, Jim has led Dow through multiple pivotal transitions, including its successful separation from Dow DuPont, positioning the company for long-term growth and achieving approximately $40 billion in 2025 sales. Now, as Jim prepares to retire, we're eager to explore how he has shaped Dow's success and what lies ahead as his successor, Karen S. Carter, takes the helm. Jim, thank you and welcome to Leadership Reimagined. I am delighted to have you as our featured speaker.
Thank you, Janice. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, you've had an extraordinary run guiding Dow, and I want to get into that in depth and all that you had to do in pivoting during tumultuous times. But let's start with what sparked your ambition in this field and inspired you throughout your career, people or events?
I would say a little bit of both, but people probably most predominantly. Out of engineering school. I went to engineering school at the University of Missouri where I grew up, and I got a degree in mechanical engineering. At the time, end of 1983, beginning of 84, we were in an oil shock, so there were not a lot of engineering jobs out there available. The economy was pretty slow, and Dow was hiring into commercial development program for technical sales, and so I ended up joining a group here called Dow Energy, Water, and Process Products, which sold all Dow products into the utility sector, the water treatment sector, and think, public water treatment to industrial water treatment. And then process industries like the chemical industry, the pulp and paper industry. At that time, the textiles industry was still big in the United States. And so there was a whole host of products that we sold. And it was a use of my engineering degree because our job was to go into the plants and really work with the engineers and the chemists in the plants to come up with the right solutions. And that was really a great fit for me. And I joined Dow after, lots of interviews with lots of different, Fortune 500 companies. And my trip to Dow was just unique and different because of the engagement with people and the atmosphere here and the way Dow worked together. And so that made the difference. And I moved to Midland, Michigan 2 weeks after I graduated school.
And so take us through a few of the really pivotal times in your career, the positions you had, including important time in Asia that you spent there, that global experience.
Sure. I came to, after I joined Dow, I was in technical sales in Atlanta. The Southeast was booming at the time. And after about 4.5, 5 years, I was asked to come into product management, or some might call it brand management, up in Midland. So in charge of a line of business. And I moved up to Midland, and that was a very new experience for me. And as part of that, I was involved at a time when the world was beginning to globalize. Dow was kind of set up in different regions of the world, and each region had its own headquarters and its own operations, and they were kind of independent. But we decided to go to a global business model, and I got engaged in some joint venture negotiations that we were having in Europe. I always assumed that I must have done okay, and I didn't offend anybody because, one day my boss came in and said, we were working late, and he said to me, "How are you with chopsticks?" And I said, I'm thinking I'm going out to get Chinese food to bring back, and we're going to be here for a while, right? And he said, no. He says, "I've got an offer for you to go to Asia to lead a business over there." And I was kind of floored at the time. And it was 1994. And so I moved to Hong Kong and I ran the energy water process product business out of Hong Kong for all of Asia Pacific. We had 14 countries, including China, which at the time was just opening up, a couple of application labs, and a marketing, sales, technical service people all over the region. So that was a big experience for me, probably the broadest group of people to that point that I had managed. After a few years in that job, I was invited to come back to Midland for a couple of years to run the business globally. And while I'm back in Midland, my boss at the time, Andrew Livers, called and said, "Hey, we'd like you to go back to Asia and run the Thailand joint venture." The Thailand joint venture was kind of a miniature version of the integrated Dow Chemical Company. We had a partner with an ethylene cracker there. We had our plastics derivatives, we had our polyurethanes, our latex, our styrenics business. So it was a miniature version of Dow. So great way to learn the integration of the company and to manage both assets and people and that territory. And while I was there, Dow acquired Union Carbide back in around 2001-2 timeframe, and Carbide was just finishing a joint venture down in Malaysia. So after 3 years in Thailand, I moved down to Malaysia to get that joint venture up and running, and also help about 125 Union Carbide expats who didn't know anybody inside Dow land back in the corporation, which we did very successfully. So those were big experiences. And along the way, there were 2 Asian financial crises that I went through, which was great training, for coming back to the United States. I came back in 2006 to run the plastics business. And of course, 2008, end of 2008, beginning of 2009, we had our own financial crises here. So having been through a couple of those in Asia was just great experience to have, to know kind of immediately what you have to do to keep the enterprise going, but also protect the enterprise during a time like that.
So all these experiences really set you up in a company that is so complex and so global. I think a lot of your employees are long tenured employees, but you were selected to be the CEO. Was it because of all these experiences, or what else happened in terms of the board saying, "Jim, you're going to take over as CEO now"?
I think a combination of things. Obviously, the experiences were huge. There weren't many people that had the breadth of experiences that I'd had. I would get comments from people about the leadership of the company and the board at the time, really appreciating the way that I ran the business, the way I conducted my business. We were never a business that was in trouble or had a lot of negative issues or consequences. We had a great team. We always had good morale in the organization through good times and bad. So I think those things played a factor. And then the other thing that I think is critically important is leaders have to make commitments and they have to follow through on them. And your ability to follow through and to do the hard work that has to be done and deliver the results that you need to deliver, maybe not perfectly, but still to do what you said you were going to do. That's what boards and that's what management teams are looking for as they choose their successor.
So how did your leadership change over these years?
There are times where leadership seems relatively easy, and then there are times where getting people aligned and driving through some tough negotiations and tough combinations and split-offs requires a little bit more edge. We signed the deal with Dow DuPont in December of 2015. Dow and DuPont did. Actually, on the same day, we signed the deal to buy the other half of Corning out of Dow Corning, the silicones joint venture. So we were actually merging Dow Corning into Dow and Dow DuPont together. And we had to do some really different and creative things. And Dow and DuPont were very different cultures. And so, we looked at it and we said, boy, we're trying to create 3 companies out of 2. And we really talked about it at length with DuPont and said, this is going to be difficult if we try to merge everybody into one company, then make a bunch of changes and then split them up. It's going to be difficult. So we did something which I thought was pretty creative. Underneath the Dow legal entity and underneath the DuPont legal entity, we divided each of the companies into three businesses: the ag business, the specialties business, and the materials business. And then Dow swapped the ag and the specialties businesses over to DuPont, and they swapped their materials businesses over to us. And that left Dow legal entity as the first one to spin out. And then DuPont took the ag business, and that was the second one to spin out. And the specialties that were left with DuPont, then they decided to put them together and put them into four divisions and then do some other deals on the end of that. That took time, but it took a lot less time than if we'd tried to do it the hard way of like merging everybody together. You weren't going to try to create one culture out of doing that. You're going to end up with three different companies and potentially three different cultures. So I think we did some really creative work. And along the way, we had to come up with $4.5 billion of synergies, cost synergies out of it. And I led a team that really drove getting the cost synergies out. So some days you were a good guy, and some days you were the tough guy that was saying, "Where's my cost synergies?" And it was a good learning experience. You have to do both on sometimes the same day, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't that's constructive and doesn't create a lot of animosity in the group.
So talk to us a little bit about also Dow's sustainability initiatives, because you've had a role as a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, the launch of its next generation sustainability goals. So how have you and the company remained true to these priorities through all of these pressures, culturally, geopolitically, all the changes?
There's a long history and a long commitment to this that really goes back to the 1980s timeframe. And if you think about the industry, it really goes back to the 1970s when Rachel Carson wrote the book Silent Spring and when President Nixon created the EPA. From that point forward, there's been a lot of pressure on industry, chemical industry, but others included, to clean up the way we operate: air emissions, water emissions, ground contamination. And Dow has for more than 30 years had sets of 10-year goals that we put forward that they would include employee health and safety, they would include environmental impact, and voluntary reporting. We've been voluntary reporting for more than 20 years, and are highly recognized in the external world in terms of the transparency of what we put out there. So directionally, we've only been going one direction, which is lower air emissions, cleaner water, better management of the watershed around the places that we operate. And on plastics, both circularity and, of course, now dealing with waste, and circularity is a big part of that. Let's move away from a once through throwaway society into one that recycles more, brings it back, turns it into virgin materials, but also does what plastics were designed to do, which is make products with less materials, lighter, cheaper, faster, stronger. And that's one of the things that makes them so, in demand and so interesting, whether it's in electric vehicles or internal combustion engine vehicles or your electronics or whatever, they play a role there. So we've always been committed. And I think of it this way: is the North Star hasn't really changed. We deal with changes in administrations, every 4 or 8 years, depending on, how the elections go. But generally, there's a middle path that kind of defines, where we're headed for the long term. And we try to stay true to that and try to make sure that the company knows what our objectives are. And our customers are the ones that are really the biggest barometer, because they're brand owners. People don't realize, if I took you to a grocery store or a Walmart, or you went through the Amazon website, we walked through it, our products are in everything you touch and use every day. So our customers feel the same pressures from the consumers, and it's a global situation about selection of materials that they want their health and beauty care products made of, selection of materials that they want to use in things like paints and coatings, how they use their plastics and recyclability. So we work with those brand owners to make sure that we're helping them also meet their commitments. It won't change, and the company's committed to it. And I think for a lot of people, I think they would be extremely surprised and hopefully impressed at how much commitment there is in the employee base here to continually do it better.
So you're saying though, then among the list over 34,000 individuals you have worldwide, there is a mission that they believe that in terms of sustainability, and it permeates throughout all levels.
Huge. Give you an example. We had a program we put together. Actually, it was planned and laid out during COVID, but we put together a path, what we called a path to zero, which in our operations, we generate a lot of power and steam, and we use a lot of fossil fuels to fire our furnaces that make ethylene, which makes polyethylene. So our emissions are pretty sizable from a CO2 standpoint, but we devised a path that stretched out to 2050, and we said, here's a plan on how we get emissions to zero by 2050. And everybody, we put it out there, and behind that plan, there were projects at every one of our plant sites to get us there. And on the power side, some of them coincided with end of life of an existing power asset and replacing it with the best available technology. But then there were some very creative things that we were doing on the ethylene cracking side, which was taking waste byproducts and putting them through an autothermal transformer to make pure hydrogen to then fire the furnaces. And when you fire with pure hydrogen, you have no CO2 emissions. Kind of a unique opportunity for our industry because of the quantity and the scale of things that we do. So we can take a site like our site up in Alberta and completely turn a site that produces over 3.5 million tons a year of product with no CO2 emissions. I tell you that's inspiring for people, but it also, when you go to hire young engineers out of college and you talk to them about what you're doing in circularity, you talk to them about what you're doing on emissions, you talk to them about what you're doing in water conservation and watershed management. They know they're coming into a company to make and sell products, but they're also coming into a company that's got a bigger purpose and to try to do it in a way that makes us preferred with our customers and puts us out front. And when you do that, it opens doors for them to be able to do their job. A customer hears about what Dow's doing and they want to go call on somebody and get a new piece of business, they're more likely to get the appointment and to have the door open because they want to understand what Dow's doing and how we can help.
So in the age of AI and people talking about, jobs going away and a number will, is this a good career for individuals going from engineering going to a Dow? Is this a long-term career that they can look at?
I still think it is. We work in the physical world, and I would say AI is going to be very important to us and already is very important to us. But we also make a physical product. And what I mean when I say that, 80% of the United States economy is a services economy. And so let's think about a company like Uber. Their product is really devising new applications and things that they can offer to you. So it's created digitally. It's delivered through drivers and vehicles, but the product's created digitally. In our case, the product may be created digitally, but physically you have to make the physical product because you've got to make, ultimately a piece of furniture, a piece of packaging, or a car, or a computer, or the equipment for a data center, or the insulation and cabling that goes into high voltage transmission lines. So there will always be a role for skilled workers, engineers, and people and researchers and chemists to do that work. AI is going to change the way they do their work and is already changing the way they do their work dramatically, but it's not going to replace the physical side of things. It'll complement it greatly.
And you are embracing AI, machine learning, as I understand it, correct?
Absolutely. In manufacturing, we use it a lot for preventative maintenance. We use robotics and AI for inspections. I'll give you an example. To go inside our plants and do maintenance, you have to do 10,000 confined space entries every year confined space entries means somebody has to dress up in a hazmat suit and go inside and inspect a vessel. We do 96% of that stuff now with robots and cameras and AI and calculations. That takes that many people and that many hours out of the safety equation, right? So it really has a massive impact on safety. In research, for 30 years, we've been using high-speed throughput technology that was created in the pharma industry back in the 90s, Simics technology that we brought in here. So now if you want to make a plastic package for a customer, we've got 30 years worth of digital data of all the research that we've done. So before we ever even go to the lab to try to make something, we go crunch the data. And the way I always describe AI to people in terms of these new models is you're running very large probabilistic models that get you to a 99.99 plus percent accuracy. And what that does for a researcher is it really narrows the field to help them focus, and then it speeds up the time for them to commercialize a new product. And we're starting to see applications of this in the legal function, for people that do intellectual property, legal work, to help them in the finance function, obviously, where there's going to be some big benefits in customer service. Customer service rep has AI assistants and agents to help them out these days. So it is everywhere in the organization.
You are embracing it. And now you would be embracing retirement after all these years at Dow and the CEO. So when you look back on your leadership and how that has changed, and also you probably come out at work, and how has that shaped you as a leader? And people have opened up to you. I mean, many years at Dow, your authenticity is, clear. Talk to us a little bit about that leadership for you over the years.
That was a pivotal moment for me for a couple of reasons. I back in 2008-9, and it was during that financial crisis. And at the time, we were going to spin out a portion of the business into a company called Dow, and that was going to facilitate Dow buying Roman Haas. And the financial crisis kind of scuttled that. I was diagnosed at that time with stage 4 cancer and working through some massive surgeries and also almost a year's worth of chemo and a financial crisis at the same time, and unwinding that deal because it didn't go through, which would end up being a great experience for me for Dow DuPont later on. But in the process of all that, I just kind of had a chance to reflect on life and say, there's some stresses that I can eliminate. And one of them is not trying to keep my personal life outside of the company and try to, live as a gay person outside of work separately from how I live my life inside work. And so I made the decision to come out. And in talking to, I've said this before, but in talking to Andrew at the time, I knew I was considered or a candidate to at some point become COO. And I said, hey, I'm a little bit worried about how the board will view that. And he said, don't worry about it at all. He said, if you're really concerned, just to go see each one of the board members and talk to them. And so I did. And to a person, they all said, we're proud of you for doing it. You're doing the right thing. We're absolutely supportive. Don't think twice about it. So I came out at work on a webcast to 53,000 employees, which is a pretty daunting thing to do. And as I said to people, the response was so overwhelming, like 99 plus percent positive. If I got one or two negative emails, I don't remember them. I would be surprised. It made a difference for me, but it also kind of lifted the lid on a conversation and made things easier to talk about at work. And that helped the work environment. And I think coming out of that, I've had people say that both through, surviving cancer and having battled through that and coming out, they could see a change in, the way I approach things, a little more patience in dealing with people, a lot more empathy in dealing with people, because you just don't know what somebody's going through on any given day. And if you've been through a few challenges like that, you're more likely to be able to relate to them and give them the space and support that they need to navigate.
So that was around the 2008, 2009 period.
Right.
Wow, that was a lot. But, that authenticity was so strong. And, last year, TLC Lions, which is a group that talks about giving the most human awards, the most human company, the most human HR leader, the most human CEO, you received, and I gave you that award. I announced it. You were chosen as the most human CEO. And I can see why, given in such a complex world that you worked in and all the issues that you dealt with, how your leadership really, meant so much to others and why they would tell their story about why you should get this award. So I think humanness in companies and where people can relate and see everybody's vulnerable to something, and you want to bring your whole self to work. Oftentimes it's hard if the leader can't relate or talk to you. And it seems like you've broken that barrier down at Dow. So congratulations. I mean, it's a huge thing to do, but it means so much to the many employees. And, I just did a podcast about trust in government is not existent. And in companies, that's where people are looking,
Right.
or having that communication, that compassion, and then your CEO, you have followership. People want to follow you, right? Because they know you care about them.
I think a couple of things that I learned along the way, both from the international experiences and from those health and coming out experiences that we talked about is, and we're in an environment right now where big swings back and forth on DEI and these things are becoming politicized. And we haven't changed course at what we're doing here because it was never about the politicization. It was about creating an environment where people want to come to work every day and they can be their best selves, attracting the best talent. And you don't know where the best talent is going to come from. You don't know what school, you don't know what background, what country they're going to come from. So you need to be open to bringing in and seeing as many people as you can to get the best talent. Culturally, when I went overseas the first time, I had a pretty good HR manager in Hong Kong, and you're in a different world. And she said something that was pretty impactful, which is when you're dealing with culture, it isn't right or wrong. It's just different. Our culture is different from the Middle East culture, is different from Chinese culture. It's more important that you understand, the similarities and the differences, but everybody gets hung up on the differences. And in the reality, we're 85, 90% the same, and it's small differences that drive a wedge in everything. And the second thing was there's very simple principles that you have to deal with. And number one is treat others the way that you want to be treated. The golden rule is in every religion in this world, and some form of it. It's a simple thing. It's hard sometimes to practice, but if you carry that through the way you do your business, people are going to want to do business with you. And customers make choices every day. They make choices based on quality, price, technical service of a product. But there's one other thing they make a choice about. They decide if they want to do business with you. And sometimes they decide because they look at how you work with each other and how you treat each other. And they look at that and they say, if those guys operate like that with each other, then that's an extension of how they're going to operate with me.
Oh, that's such a good example. It's so true. When you walk into a company, you can feel the culture, right? And so when you're calling on clients, they can feel the collaboration that is there or not there among the workers. That's really interesting. So you're about to hand over the reins to Karen. You went through a succession planning process, as every board does. What are Karen's greatest strengths, and how do you feel about now the next chapter that's going to be for Dow?
I feel very comfortable. Karen's got great followership. She's a great human being. She's worked through her own challenges, but the way she deals with people with respect and values people is apparent every day. I think it makes people feel comfortable about the transition that's about to happen. She's where I come from, more of an engineering background. She comes from more of a business, a technical background. She also had a few years as our chief inclusion and chief HR officer, so she knows the people aspect of the whole company globally, which I think is super powerful. And some of the things that she's going to be tackling, may be less on the engineering side and more on the commercial side and more on the AI side, and how you harness that to drive growth in the company. So I feel good about that. It was a very deliberate process with the board. We started a little over 3 years ago, and at the time we had a few candidates that we were looking at to become the next chief operating officer. That's an important decision for us because when you become COO, you're one step away, and you're really in the middle of running the day-to-day environment. And she's been doing that for the last 18 months. So, I don't want this to sound trite, and I don't mean it that way, but when you become COO, it's yours if you perform, right? It's yours, and she's performed. One of the other things we did was, we worked with a really strong outside group to put together a program that she's been leading called Transform to Outperform, which looks at the whole company and the way we do our work end to end, as well as the way we're structured, trying to set new competitive standard for performance, both financial cost, as well as the way we do, everything inside the company. And that's been a great learning experience for her along the way, because you have to go through the whole company with a fine tooth comb. So she's going to come out of that into this transition on July 1 and have everything laid out to be very successful. And the other thing that I committed to do for her is I helped her to make the change in leadership team. So on July 1, when she starts, her leadership team is in place. She doesn't have to spend 6 months or a year doing that. And any changes or discussions from my team to her team, I would take care of that so that she's ready to move forward.
Well, congratulations to the board and to you, and of course to Karen, because I do, as a search consultant, I do believe that if you can have successors sit in many seats, it is far better to go internal, particularly in a company as complex as Dow, but in many companies as well. So if you prepare people by having them sit in many seats, they're there, they can take over and continue to a great culture and a great company. So going forward for you, what are your plans? What do you want to do next? Because you've obviously been very active your whole career. You're going to continue to do other great initiatives. What might they look like?
Yeah, I will probably, I serve on the 3M board. I'm the lead director there, which I'll continue to do. As executive chair for Dow, this is not going to be a long-term thing. There's a couple of projects that I have primarily to work on for the board. We're renegotiating some terms with our Saudi joint venture, and I've got a long relationships there. So I want to get that wrapped up so that I can hand that over to Karen. And then we have a small modular nuclear project going down in Texas with X Energy and the Department of Energy. And so I want to get that to a point where I can hand that over to Karen. But this is all going to be kind of near-term stuff. At that point, I might take on another board. I've been supporting some research work for a number of years with my doctor who did all of my cancer surgeries in Pittsburgh. And we've been looking at pathways to treat this with immunotherapy and other things, so people don't have to go through some of the horrific surgeries that I had to go through and others have to go through to survive this. I've been engaged with my alma mater, we created a precision health center at the University of Missouri, which is doing tremendously well. And now we're working on a Center for Energy Excellence, which is addressing these power demands and needs that we're going to have, not just in the United States, but around the world, and looking at those technologies. So I'm kind of passionate about that space. And then some of it will be real retirement, travel and do some things and see some friends that I've made over the years that I haven't seen in a while, time with family. And but I will stay engaged. I do want to keep the brain working, and I think I've got a lot to contribute.
The CEO role today is very difficult. So I'm sure you have many friends, people that you have not seen. It's really daunting in terms of what CEOs and boards contending with and the speed of change. But you're leaving Dow in a very great place. And so I would ask you too, any final thoughts for our audience or to your Dow leaders and workers globally that you want to say?
The first thing I'd like to say to them is that it's just been a real pleasure to work with them for almost 43 years now. I'm very proud of the company. The company's got a very strong culture, a very can-do attitude, and they need to maintain that. You've always got to keep your mind set that we can solve any problem, even the most challenging problem. And I think that keeps things positive and moving forward. The volatility in the world is not going to decrease, so we need to be eyes wide open about that. I think that's what's made the jobs difficult more lately is the breadth of the jobs, the amount of time that you have to spend dealing with this volatility, and the amplitude and the magnitude of the volatility is greater than anything we've seen. And I said to Karen, I said, look, toughest part of the CEO job is it's easy to get sucked into the day-to-day, the here and the now, the make the quarter side of things, but you also have to have things in flight for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years out. And you're the only one in the seat that's going to be looking at what do I have in motion that's going to be coming good in that time period. And so you have to carve out that time to do that for the company, because when you get into these jobs, sometimes you're playing more defense than you expect. As a CEO, you spend more time trying to defend the enterprise than driving it forward, and you can't. You've got to do both.
Jim Fitterling, your legacy will continue for years to come. You've reshaped Dow into a more innovative, forward-looking company, which also truly demonstrated what it means to lead with purpose, inclusion, and authenticity. And what you said today was so empowering, I think, for others to hear. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It sounds simple. It isn't, but you've done that. And your impact, your leadership really will be felt across Dow, the industry, but for many people that you touched and inspired along the way. So thank you for being with us today, sharing your very personal, professional, and personal story. And I just so appreciate what you have done as a leader, and now look forward to seeing Karen in her role. So thank you for being with us today very much.
Well, thank you, Janice. It's been a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed talking with you. I'm looking forward to the next chapter, and I hope you get a chance to talk to Karen sometime soon.
I will. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to another game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined. You can find me on LinkedIn or visit us at elliggroup.com. Thank you for joining us today.